don't we get started? Any questions? Yeah. So we go through the combine week here next week. I think Tuesday, Wednesday, we'll be in meetings with ownership, and so I expect that we're going to know fairly quickly. I said it's a Super Bowl, but I think more specifically, I think somewhere in the neighborhood next week, we're going to. There's a couple factors here. Obviously the cap projections came out. We're further down the road with the draft class. Obviously the pro free agents. So I would anticipate it being within the next 2 weeks. I think I just said the next 2 weeks. Yeah, next 2 weeks. Say that again. Yeah. Well, look, we better. So the question was, finding the right solution to quarterback in this league, which is obviously very competitive in our division. I think it's vital. I saw this humorous meme the other day where there was a Bronco fan with a shirt on, and there was 8 quarterbacks names with a cross through it, and he's drinking the quarterback Kool-Aid, and our job is to make sure that this next one, doesn't have a line through it. I think so. The question is, in our interactions, meetings with quarterbacks here, what's important? I think all of it. The first thing is getting to put a name with a face, and it's the first personal visit where you're like, nice to meet you, and then you'll spend time with questions, and there'll be football related, and there'll be follow-up meetings, pro day visits, private workout visits. And so these are all pieces of the equation that I think are necessary. And obviously the beginning of this event was to combine medical information, hence the term combine. And then pretty soon, let's run a 40 and let's run a few of these cone drills. And let's have these meetings. But the interactions in the meetings are important because it is for a lot of us, the scouts maybe not so much, but for a lot of us, it's the first time we're getting introduced to a prospect. And so not just at quarterback, but at the other positions. And I think that first impression is important. Young student athletes, what are we looking for? I think this. I think that, we're looking for goal-driven players, athletes that are unselfish to some degree. And then I would say that one trait is that we use that term grit a lot, but that ability to get up time and time again, overcome adversity. It's a little bit more challenging now with the portal. I started thinking to myself, how many times when I was in school that I would have loved to jump into a portal, upset or disappointed or mad or whatever, had a bad practice. And but those traits still exist, and I think those are important traits when we're visiting with young athletes. Yeah, good question. So quarterbacks that aren't as tall, maybe that aren't prototype, I think generally speaking, it might vary how teams value prototype heights, but 6'2" might be a starting point. Look, as a coordinator, I've had Kerry Collins, who was 6'5", Quincy Carter, who was built differently, Romo, Bledsoe, Testaverde, and then Drew for a long time. There was an evolution with Drew. I don't know that we set out to go in a direction relative to the makeup of our offensive line, but he was someone that was extremely athletic in the pocket. He's a very good foot athlete. And so, look, that first draft in 2006, I was telling the story last night. In the 4th round, we have the 2nd pick of that draft, and we're going to select tight end Owen Daniels, who was at Wisconsin, played at my high school. And so we just had to wait for the Texans to make their pick. This is when the draft was 2 days. Of course, we just finished breakfast. I'm on the phone with Owen, and this is when you had that classic call waiting where, like, when you're on the other end, someone just clicked in, and I'm like, and it gets back on. The Texans are going to draft me. We end up backing up a few picks, and we select a right guard out of Bloomsburg, Jari Evans, who's going to be a future Hall of Fame player. And so we didn't know at the time we were matching somebody who was extremely talented inside for where that important part of the pocket is for a quarterback. The 3 yards behind the center, because generally speaking, we're going to climb the pocket, and at that point, quarterbacks can do a lot of different things. Then Carl Nix came a year later, and then pretty soon we had 2 really good guards, and I think maybe too often we were given too much credit for, part of that was an evolution, and we liked what we saw, and then it was like, well, we need more of that. But I do think part of our jobs always is to build around the strength of your players. And so even this year, what are the things that we feel like our receivers do well, that Russ does well, the running backs, that's our jobs. And so our offense, when I say wherever I've been, has been a kind of always been an evolution of starting with the ingredients we have and then building around them. So I think there's still some things that are paramount today. At some point, teams are going to make you win from the pocket. We can rush a certain way to keep a quarterback from escaping, and so we're going to have to be, wherever you're at, proficient enough on 3rd down to take a snap, find a throw, and protect that spot that you're referencing, regardless of height. Because I think oftentimes these guys are seeing through lanes, not necessarily over them, but certainly for some quarterbacks that can be a little bit more challenging. Yeah, Ronald Curry in Buffalo. I'm excited for him. We were lucky enough to have Ronald for a number of years. I lose track of how many. He's real good communicator. He's smart. He's been in, a lot of, I would say, a lot of productive offenses and been a part of a lot of productive teams. I think he understands the work week and the time on task necessary. I knew how much Al Davis thought of him when he drafted him in Oakland. But I'm anxious to follow his progress because I think he's a real bright young coach with a great future. I think the difficulties in evaluating, I think the receiver position's difficult. There are a lot of misses there. And the quarterback position's difficult. Sometimes, and this is not just recent, and we go all the way back to, the run and shoot, and we can list a number of guys that were successful that we didn't expect to be successful and guys that weren't. And I think that oftentimes the systems that they're in can be difficult to evaluate. It's harder to find good inside linebackers anymore. It used to be difficult to evaluate offensive tackles because teams were running, option football, veer schemes, wishbone, or what have you. Now we get great film in evaluating whether guys can pass protect or not. But then conversely, we get more difficult film at other positions. To your point with quarterbacks, I think that I think one thing that's hard to measure is their ability to multitask and process and make decisions. It's one thing, like you can visit with someone and, they can be intelligent, but man, how quickly can they deliver the information and how quickly can they get through the progression? Are they accurate? There's some fundamental things that we have to see that are present. And so sometimes it's not as difficult as we make it out to be. And then sometimes, listen, it's very difficult. And so I think we'll be really good at this. And I think to some degree we're glad that a lot of people aren't. I don't know that a lot's changed relative to prioritizing what's most important for the quarterback position. Certainly, there has been change, but look, I think accuracy is important. I think leadership comes in a lot of different ways. So historically speaking, we've had quiet, successful quarterbacks. We've had outspoken, successful quarterbacks. We've had tall, short. So there are a lot of things that make you understand shapes and sizes, personality traits, but there are some constants that go with successful players at that position. I think offenses have changed a little bit, and yet we've never not valued a quarterback that can beat you with his feet. That goes back to Young and Montana, and that historically that's nothing new. But we are seeing more in the college game, and then we get to evaluate that, and then we're seeing more of that come into our game, and I think it's good. I think it's good. I'm not finished answering that question. I think 4th and 1 overtime in the Super Bowl, the play we saw Kansas City run, I don't know that we see that play 10 years ago. That doesn't mean we don't see a conversion, but I don't think we see that RPO option with a few different reads. And so those are some of the things that I think have evolved. All right, Christian Parker, Jim Leonard. Christian was with us. He got promoted. They're getting a bright young coach. Obviously, Vic knows him. Vic has worked with him before. Christian's really sharp. I'd say his degree, if you will, in defensive football is in that scheme. He was a pleasure to work with, and I'm excited that he has that opportunity. Vic and I talked at length about Christian. He was one of the coaches that we kept from last year's staff. Christian left, and we hired Jim Leonard. Jim was someone that I had spoken with last offseason. He actually played for us briefly. I know he played for Denver for a year. He had hip replacement surgery last year, so he was kind of going to be in a position where he couldn't commit to a full-time job. He helped out Illinois. I think that he's extremely bright. He was as a player. Like, he solved all the problems as a player. I mean, he was in Buffalo, the Jets, Baltimore, Denver. He played 10 years, and I think he's got, one of these high ceilings that we see with some young coaches. And I say young, but it's kind of all relative. I think a lot of him, and we spent a lot of time on that process. We'll keep going. Yeah, without making a comparison first, I'd say with Mims, we saw him flourish as a returner, and I really think the only thing that really stopped his progress as a receiver was us. In trying to find roles. He's playing the same position as Jerry, and so I've said that a number of times. I think you're going to see a lot of growth with this player. He's tough. He can run, and we're certainly excited we have him, but I think the key is for us, and I say us as coaches, game planning, evolving, and every time we've kind of put his name on a certain play, he hasn't disappointed. That doesn't mean the ball always went to him, but the point I'm making is I think his progress was hampered a little bit more with the depth in the room and what we were able to do, and sometimes trying to balance that out. I think we'll see that expand. Walsh books, I've read a few Parcells books. I've read some books outside of football, specifically Ryan Holiday, who's from New Orleans. Not a great reader. I like to when I have time. I always feel like there's something else that takes my attention away, but I do like gathering the information and thinking outside the box, and so sometimes some of those books provide that. All right, 2 more questions. You use yours. Say it again. Panthers. Yeah, number one, it's not for me to evaluate. It's of no importance for me to evaluate. I mean, obviously, we want to look back at our own grades and evaluate how we saw those players. I think it's always difficult when there's a need or a must, and then, it comes down to, like, what are your criteria points? Are you drafting prototype with the first pick of the draft? Some places I've been where you just have to be. So that's one of those that varies per team, per organization. But certainly CJ's had a great, and we saw him firsthand. He's had a great rookie year, and it's not new. The Manning Leaf debate that goes back. There are a lot of reports torn up after that selection process, and so it repeats itself, and you really want to turn over the stones, and this is, for me, where analytics really comes into play a lot in the procurement of players. All right, one last question. What are the mistakes? Common mistakes. What are the common mistakes made? Well, look, I think there's risk. Obviously, there's no certainty, or else we'd be fantastic with the draft. There's certain risks. I think, man, how quickly can they process the information? For some, when you get them in rookie minicamp, you realize it's, I've been with a rookie before and just feel like this is not how I wanted it to go. He's having trouble spitting out the plays. Maybe it takes a while. Maybe that's something that you realize is going to be a hindrance or set him back. I think we shouldn't miss on accuracy because we get to see it. We shouldn't miss on stature because we get to feel it and look at it and measure it. We shouldn't miss on athleticism. All of those traits should be easier to be correct on, but the more difficult ones, leadership, we shouldn't miss on. We should feel that and be able to research that. But it's that other element, and it's really the difference of just that. And for some, it's 2 thumb thicks, and for others, it's 1, and you hope it's 1. All right. Thank you, guys.